again tonight. And I've got a fabulous guest on, an author who has contributed some terrific articles to Yowza.com, John DiNardo. And, John, I'm bringing you in.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Marshall.
That's a pleasure as always. And I can see the chat room is getting all fired up. Susan, PX 2012, hello, darling. You are my gal. We always have a good thing going. Susan comes in and helps me with the shows, and she's monitoring the chat room because I'm sitting here time slicing 3 things at the same time, and she gets all these really great things in for me. So, and she's telling me my voice is sounding mighty distorted. So, Susan, is the voice better now? All right, I'm in the studio. So while I'm getting my voice issues worked out here a little bit, first off, John, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell people how you came to the topic of Planet 12.
Well, I heard about Planet X in 2002, and immediately, without any knowledge at all about the subject, I had a spiritual understanding of it. I just knew that it was true. And I just feel this was something from God compelling me to get into the subject and to warn people about it and try to bring them to a closer connection to God as a result of these catastrophes that are coming to people in the world. As we know that fear often breeds a closer relationship with God. And that's what I felt compelled to do. Well, anyway, the more I learned about it, the more I realized that this subject really did harmonize with all the prophecies of the Bible. And not only that, I began to study the scientific evidence, and because of my background as a physics teacher and an electronics engineer and electrical engineer, I understood the electric solar system as people were beginning to present it, and how this electric solar system actually caused much of the devastating phenomena that we have witnessed throughout history and that we'll probably be witnessing again as this brown dwarf star makes its entry into our solar system.
So, now, when did this all start? You know, for me, I mean, I always get the question, you know, how did you come into this every time I do an interview with somebody else? And I always tell them the same thing. I walk straight backwards into it. What about you?
Well, you know, I just got that spiritual understanding, and immediately I felt compelled. And I know some people, I guess everybody has their concept of spirituality, and I can tell you that mine is general enough that everyone can empathize with it without speaking about any particular religious, you know, point of view. I just felt compelled by the Creator, God, to get into the subject and to start warning people that indeed it's true and the time is coming. And the more I learned about it, I started reading books by Mark Hazelwood and other people, and began to study and see that, yes, this does make sense. According to the physics that I know, it makes sense in terms of the simple phenomena that we experience every day. For example, electrical discharges. When you walk across a carpet, and everybody's experienced this, where there's static electricity is picked up by your body, and when you go to grab something that is a large metal object that acts as a reservoir or a basin for electric charge, the instant before your finger touches that makes contact, there is a very painful snap, an electric arc, a discharge of electrons, static electrons from your body to that doorknob. Likewise, we see on a cosmic, celestial scale the same phenomenon occurring. When comets drenched in plasma, full of a static charge, come very close to Earth, they discharge, and we see historical evidence, we see evidence in the Bible talking about these plasmatic or plasma discharges. Many people believe that the Grand Canyon was formed by electrical discharges causing arc welding, sort of, or a routering effect into the surface, deep into the surface of the Earth. And as this comet came by in a zigzag motion, it created a channel, a very, very deep channel, that is now the Grand Canyon. That's just an example.
Well, I've been there. I mean, you know, I know how you feel. I remember one time, I mean, this is when I was in the Army, and we went up into the Grand Canyon to go photograph some wreckage that needed to be removed, aircraft wreckage. And we literally were flying in a bunch of Hueys right down off the deck. You can't do that anymore, but like we were just 5 feet off the Colorado, blasting through. You could almost hear Flight of the Valkyries, you know, dum, 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 dum. It was pretty impressive. And as I was going through, you know, and I was a young fellow, but I remember looking at the walls of the canyon and going, don't tell me a stream did this, or a river. You know, I'm sorry. This is hard rock here. You know, it's not going through sandstone.
It was obvious.
But we see these things also. Mars, largest canyon in the solar system is on Mars, Val Marineris, and so
now,
are they going to tell us that was water too? Huh?
Right, isn't this the way routering? You take a routering tool and you carve a channel into a piece of wood. And that's similar to what happens with these discharges in the Earth. So we have electrical phenomenon occurring. And not only that, as you know, the electrical phenomenon, the discharging that occurs between close flying comets that buzz and graze the sun, causing discharges and sort of a reactionary solar sneeze, so to speak, that's called a coronal mass ejection, whereby charged particles are sneezed out in all directions by the sun, impacting all the planets and devastating those planets in many different ways. So there's so many electrical effects that we are basically our enemies, enemy weapons coming against us right now in terms of electrical and electromagnetic forces.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I both see these things. We're both in it for the species. And you can't, you know, I came to this and I didn't come to it with any sense of connection to the other side or to a greater God. But as you are in it, you know, about halfway, if you don't have that, it really piles up on you and makes you start to feel pretty hopeless. And on the other hand, if you can connect, and that doesn't mean you throw the science out. You got to find a balance between the two. It's almost alchemical, if you will. But when you do that, I find that it gives you a sense of balance and hope for the future. What about you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's no human safeguard or platform or foundation that I can rest upon. No human being can look to anything that can look even to the highest achievements of man to protect themselves from these disasters. I mean, even the most technically guarded and founded, with the deepest foundations of technology and science cannot protect these men of power from what's coming. I mean, they're building underground cities, and still they're concerned. They're very worried about the integrity of these cities. In fact, here's something that I got from somebody, and somebody who's sort of on the inside, who's worked on the geological studies and the oceanographic studies that are going on right now.
Okay, good. So you have some good current data. Yeah, let's do that. And then,
well, this guy was saying
we'll have to get into it, and I want this because I'm doing research.
Okay, well, this guy was saying that they're very much concerned about the integrity of their underground cities, even though they had, of course, the money to buy the very best geologists and determine what they consider to be the safest locations deep within the rock of the crust, Earth's crust. You know, the Earth's crust, the lithosphere, is about 400 miles deep. And I guess they went down several miles and found what they consider to be the safest regions, but still they're concerned. So what they did was, this person told me that they've actually been creating earthquakes with HAARP around near those regions where their underground cities are, just to test the integrity of those underground cities. because that's how afraid they are of going down there and being buried alive.
Whoa. Whoa. That's some serious stuff. So they went down 2 miles, and now all of a sudden, the best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many miles. It could have been 4 or 5. I'm not sure exactly. But if you look at the earthquake, now we can corroborate this information by looking at the depth of some of these questionable earthquakes that people are insinuating are caused by HAARP. If you look at the depths of them, that might tell you that, yeah, maybe HAARP did generate these earthquakes at depths very close to those depths that are where the underground cities are built, just to test the integrity of the rock structure to see how well it'll hold up in a man-made earthquake.
Wow. 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 Well, what do you think they're going to do about it?
They're scared.
I mean, in the long run, they're trying. So, I mean, there's the best laid plans of mice and men are failing. Now they don't know what they're going to do.
Well, they're still going to go underground, but the best laid plans of mice and men are quite questionable and quite dubious when you've got a planet that's going to come in and wreck the entire, you've got a brown dwarf star that's going to come in and wreck the entire surface of the planet.
Right.
I mean, they knew from the beginning that what they were doing was, just a long shot, to say the least, building these underground cities. I mean, Schneider was talking about all of that. He was talking about. Oh, I've heard. Yes, I read about him in your book, and I've seen some of his videos on YouTube. But I'm really sort of pleasantly surprised to hear that Phil Schneider was expressing the same or interpreting the power elites' fear and apprehension about this whole thing, despite the so-called complexity of their cities. Is that true? I can imagine they would be, because this is a superhuman event. And man going up against a superhuman event is like, it's just, there's no match at all. So anyone would be quite apprehensive about it, I'm sure. I would be. In fact, I would never go underground except for the solar scorching that's going to come. That's the only thing that would drive them underground, is the solar scorching. Because how else can you escape it?
Yeah. I mean, when we were doing the channeling research, we had guides that were telling us, and different guides, and they all said this 2 miles underground plan was not going to work out for them, that they weren't going to fare that much better than anybody that's on the surface.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'd rather be on the surface in an earthquake than underground. But I believe, this is my surmisal anyway, that's my best guess based upon what I see coming. And we know the solar scorching is coming. If you see the movie Knowing, you see a graphic portrayal of that solar scorching that will basically kill most of the life on Earth, on the surface. And that would be the only reason that I could think of why they would want to go underground. Certainly not to protect against earthquakes, certainly not to protect against floods. I mean, they would have to come back out of the ground when the flooding comes, come back out of the ground when the earthquake happens. And they don't know, because those events may be happening simultaneously. So I think they're scared. They're like a fighter, going up against a world champion, and they know they don't have a chance of winning that bout.
Yeah, I mean, it's not working out for them. But, it really goes to the heart of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is dead men tell no tales. And I think that a lot of these incidents where people who were really getting to the heart of the matter met very sudden and tragic ends. And this was happening years ago, back even before, in some cases before I was even getting involved with it. And in particular, is that article, that fabulous article that you wrote for Yowza. And I can remember at the time we published it, I thought it was just an interesting article. It needed to go out. But what I realized was that after we published Planet X and the Mysterious Death of Dr. Robert Harrington, and by the way, for my listeners, in the show description is a link to that article on Yowza.com, and you can go and get there and see what was written. This was back in May 2008. But this explained to me why all of a sudden there was this inexplicable stoppage, as though the whole topic of us being in a binary star system fell off of a cliff. All of the astronomers and scientists and science writers got a simple, subtle message with his death. This is a third rail topic. People with power will not tolerate you talking about it. And if they can take a run at you, you know, that's it. You're going to be running a spumoni cart in front of the Colosseum in Rome if you're lucky. But with his death, I mean, I think it's really necessary for people out there to understand the mindset of the people who did this, because, as you just mentioned in the opening of the show, things are not working out, okay? And the dots are not connecting the way they thought it would. And they went to extreme measures to, well, let's just call it what it is, to assassinate people that wanted to come out and tell the rest of us poor schmoes what the heck's going on. Robert Harrington was one of them. Brilliant man, brilliant man. Tragic, sudden death. His widow believes he was assassinated for his work on Planet X. So do I. So let's start with that, and then let's get into some of the other folks. But then later on in the second half of the show, after we have done 10 Dead Men Tell No Tales, what I want to do, John, is then take that, move it forward into the present so people can see how all of these dots are connected from our point of view as Planet X researchers. Okay?
Okay. Dr. Robert S. Harrington was the chief astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. Dr. Harrington is mentioned in a landmark New York Times article of 1983, prior to the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite. I won't read the article because it's very lengthy, but it's a wonderful article, and Marshall has it posted on his website. In that article, it mentions, I'm just going to quote the part, Dr. Robert S. Harrington believes that this is a brown dwarf star. I think it says it somewhere in the article. And incidentally, here's a very telling phrase in that article that everyone should remember, because it absolutely proves that this body is coming in. That phrase is that it's 5 billion miles out. However, that may seem like a long distance, but it's hardly, it says, quote here in the New York Times article of 1983, hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. This was 1983. This is from NASA, by way of the New York Times. So we've established from that, the powers that be, that this body is within the gravitational influence of the sun. Take an analogous situation. An asteroid flies by Earth way at high altitudes, and it's just barely within the gravitational influence of the Earth. Is that asteroid going to be pulled in? Yes, even though the force is rather small, it will be pulled in gradually closer to the Earth, and the closer this asteroid comes to the Earth, the greater the gravitational force of attraction becomes, and therefore the greater the acceleration downward toward the Earth becomes, because acceleration is directly proportional to the force applied to it. So this increasing gravitational force will cause it to accelerate. In fact, we know that according to Newton's universal law of gravitation, as two bodies get closer together, their gravitational force of attraction increases not in a linear way, but exponentially. So therefore,
Yes.
the acceleration will also increase exponentially. And this thing is going to come flying down to Earth at a tremendous speed until, of course, the friction of the air causes it to heat up. But in space, there's no air. So there's no friction to slow it down or heat it up. And this thing is accelerating at an incredible rate now toward the sun for the last 28 years since it was acknowledged that it was within the gravitational influence of the sun.
Mm-hmm. Plus the fact that when it's going, when it's making its transition from, the perihelion side of this trajectory to the aphelion side where it's going out of the system, it's whipping around, and crossing the cusp. I use the analogy of you go to the park on Sunday for all the games and the rides and whatnot, and there's that big ride that you have to whip, and it whips around, and you just sit there in that little car for a long, long, long trip that's slow and tedious, and you wave at everybody and try and look excited, but you're really bored stiff, and then it comes around the end and whap, that thing just whips you right around, and then woo, you get your jollies. Well, I mean, what you're describing is part of it speeding up. The other part of it is it's going to be whipping around.
Yes, right. I mean, look at the analogy. You're a fisherman, okay, and your reel is way out into the water, and you latch onto this big fish. That big fish is planet X. You, the fisherman, are the sun. The fishing line is the gravitational force of attraction between the fish and you, between the sun and planet X. So as you start reeling it in, you're applying a pulling force, just as gravity is applying a pulling force from the sun to planet X. Now, as this fish comes in, it starts flying over your head. Now the fish is no longer coming toward you. You're no longer reeling it in toward you. It has overshot you, gone beyond you, and now you got to pull back on it. It's got momentum. Yeah. It's continuing to go in the same direction. You got to yank back on it and cause it to decelerate. And this is what is happening. What will happen as Planet X gets closer to the sun? It's going to overshoot the sun. It won't hit the sun because of what we call repulsion forces, I believe. And I don't think that's too well understood. But it never has hit the sun in all of its many passages over the millennia, so we know it will not hit the sun this time either. But it's going to overshoot, and therefore the sun is going to say, hey, wait a minute, come back here. And it's going to pull back, just like that fisherman will pull back on the line as a fish goes flying over his head. And that's going to take a while, but in the process it'll continually come back around as the sun's gravity pulls it around, and it'll really accelerate this body tremendously and whip it just like King David, just like little David's slingshot in the Bible when he killed Goliath with his sling, a stone in the sling. So this is that little stone could accelerate so much from that sling that it would hit a big giant right on the forehead and kill him dead. But just imagine what would happen to a brown dwarf star when this sun, 1/3 of a million Earth masses sun, with its gravitational swing, could do to this brown dwarf star, which is a puny 1,000 Earth masses. I say that facetiously. Well, anyway.
Well, we got to be relative. But yeah, and I think that Harrington was seeing this. But also what we think is we were actually curious about Harrington's trip to New Zealand and what brought about his, again, just calling it like it is, like I see it, resulted in his assassination. And he had a telescope with a lens specifically ground for this mission. He was going to go looking for Nibiru, and we spent a lot of time on that and actually found that given the time that he went to New Zealand, and he did that at his own expense, and he went up to the top of a mountain, made his observation. If he had the right viewing sky, really good, clear, crisp sky, there was a brief 3 to 4 hour window of time before sunrise, that he actually could have observed it at that time. What did, have you done anything similar in terms of backtracking and analyzing his observation trip to New Zealand?
Well, actually, you know, Marshall, I was the one who I believe I might have erroneously mentioned something that's really not key to this entire story. It doesn't change the veracity of the story. The fact that I believed Harrington said in his memo that he published prior to these telescopic observations, in the memo he said he was dispatching an appropriate telescope to a southern location. Now, I think my minor error was that he himself did not go down there, but he dispatched a scope to the U.S. Naval Observatory's new auxiliary observatory in Blackbirch, New Zealand, that had just opened up, I believe. And it had opened up as a result, let me think now, as a result of the Planet X thing that occurred after the IRAS. I'm not exactly sure, but that's not too important. The thing is that he dispatched this 8-inch scope, and I believe it was the scope lens was specially ground probably by a man named Ronald Stone, who also worked for them, the U.S. Naval Observatory. But again, that's not too important information. But the only difference is that Harrington himself did not do it. He dispatched this 8-inch telescope down there. Now, in his memo, Dr. Harrington's memo of October 1991, he stated that his calculations of the location, I guess based on, I was told by someone else who studied this, that he had done extensive computerized calculations trying to determine the ongoing position of Planet X over a period of a few years in the 1980s. And by his extensive computerized calculations, he was so meticulous that it was almost certain that this object was indeed where he thought it was, or he had calculated it to be. And therefore, he felt confident to have that 8-inch scope dispatched to the Blackbirch Observatory in New Zealand, and he said in his memo of October 1991, that it would be viewing the southern skies, because New Zealand is close to the South Pole, during the viewing months. Now, we know he did not mention the viewing months, but we have learned since then from James McCanney and other people that the viewing months are May and June of the year. Those are the 2 months of the year that you can view it. And I hope I can sidetrack just a little bit, just for a second, to explain why I believe that those viewing months are only May and June. I'm going to give you an analogy. You're on the second floor of a department store. And you know how the escalators are? There's a down escalator, and then just opposite the down escalator, there's an up escalator. Now, you're on the second floor.
Yeah, the guy with the piano is usually between the two of them.
Right.
Just throwing the road there.
Right. Now, you're walking in a circle. You're planet Earth, and you're walking in a big circle around both escalators on the second floor. That's like the Earth going around the sun in 1 year, and each quadrant of that revolution around the sun represents one season of the year. Well, when you get to the point where you're looking down the up escalator, you see a big guy way at the bottom of the escalator coming up at you. You're looking straight down, and you see him coming up at you. He's coming up at an angle because those stairs, that escalator is at an angle. And the floor, the second floor that you're on, represents the ecliptic plane of our solar system, that invisible cosmic-sized disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. Okay, that's what the second floor of that department store represents. And you're looking down, and you can see this big guy coming up the escalator very slowly. He's not walking, he's just riding it upward. That's in the month of May, as you walk around the escalators. Now you walk further, and you're walking into the month of June, July. You're going around this circle. Now you can no longer see that man down the escalator because he's blind. by the walls and by the floor and everything. So likewise, the only time we could see it is in May and June, because that's when the big guy, we can see right down that escalator, that upgoing escalator. Well, that's the analogy. But anyway, that's what Harrington said. We said during the months of viewing months, which we know are May and June, that's when it's going to be taking pictures to try to verify the position of this object. Well, that would have been, since his memo was October 1991, those viewing months would have had to have been May and June of 1992. And he said furthermore in his memo of October 1991 that when those photographic plates are returned to the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., that they would be examined and there would be these are blink comparison photographs. And blink comparison is a wonderful, ingenious technique that was created by, or developed by the Pluto astronomer, Pluto discovery astronomer Clyde Tombaugh.
They were the first. Pluto was discovered with the blink method. Yeah. Describe that method for the listeners out there.
Okay, if you were to take a picture of the sky, you'd see thousands and thousands of stars. How would you pick out one little planet X, one little dim star, or it might not even be visible? Of course, there must have been some visible light, or else you might have been using an infrared scope. I don't think he was using it. He might have been using an infrared scope. But how would you see one star out of maybe a billion stars in one photographic frame? Well, you would, all those stars are going to appear still, stationary. But if there's a planet there that's moving, just one object that's moving amidst all millions of stationary stars, then you would take another photograph on a second night and maybe another photograph on a third night. Then you would take the photographic plates and have transparencies of these made, so like negatives where you could see through them. They would be overlaid on top of one another and light would be shined through each plate from the side. And as a result, you could turn on a light and illuminate just one of the 2 or 3 overlapping, sandwiched photographic plates, each plate being from one night's photograph. And you could alternate the flashing of the lights, the illumination of each of those plates, such that the human eye would be able to detect if the alternation rate of flashing were appropriate for the human eye. You could look at the huge field of thousands of stars and see just one little object moving, appearing to be moving like the frames of a motion picture would move. And that's what the blink comparison method is. Well, that's what Dr. Harrington was going to analyze. He said when they come back, which would have been the summer of 1992, we're going to examine those plates and we're going to find out for sure. Well, Dr. Harrington somehow never released that information. He would have had the plates analyzed, I believe, probably by the fall of 1992, but we never heard anything about it at all. And then in January of 1993, Dr. Harrington suddenly dies of fast-acting esophageal cancer. And it's so suspicious because, first of all, suppose he died of a truly natural causes, not man-made causes. Why did not the U.S. Naval Observatory publish the findings, the analysis of those plates, despite his death? They should have gone on and published it. This was the greatest search in all of astronomical history, the one that was the most highly prized search in all of astronomical history, and yet they just dropped it. No mention whatsoever. It's so obvious, the glaring criminality there. So it leads you to believe that, yeah, Dr. Harrington, well, maybe he died, accidentally, just from natural causes, but it's very unlikely. They probably murdered him. Now, here's another piece of evidence that really, I guess, adds so much more weight to the conspiracy belief, conspiracy evidence that he was murdered, and that is that in the obituary, they honored him and eulogized Dr. Robert S. Harrington. This obituary was published by the U.S. Naval Observatory, and of course it came from the very top. Now, the very top would be the guys from the intelligence agencies, the National Security Agency, which has overseeing responsibility, supervisory oversight of NASA and all of the other government agencies. including the CIA, that's how powerful the National Security Agency is, they would have said, hey, look, let's give this guy a nice eulogy, and let's try to make it look like, well, the reason that Harrington didn't talk about Planet X anymore in 1992 before he died was because he just lost interest in it. So that's what they said. They said toward the end of his career, Bob Harrington just sort of lost interest in Planet X. He didn't care about it anymore.
Yeah, but the obituary actually said that he was disappointed. And
okay.
There was nothing consistent with anything that else that happened. Just out of curiosity, what happened to the plates?
That's right. I mean, even still, the plates would have been published, would they not? So
that's right. Where are they? Have you been able in your research to find these plates? Are they existent somewhere? Would someone be able to do a Freedom of Information Act to get these plates? Or did these plates wind up going into somebody's Dipsy dumpster?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I've never gone to the point of trying to get a Freedom of Information Act request to find the, in fact, I would be afraid to do it. I'd probably wind up dead myself, just requesting the plates. So, but we don't even have to do that. We know, look, for those of us who know what's going on, and we have a ton of other evidence from so many different sources, you could just, you could just drown in an ocean of evidence that that this planet is coming in and the government is doing everything they can to suppress knowledge of it. Those of us who know, we don't need any more evidence to know that Dr. Harrington was very likely murdered. And even you mentioned his wife believes he was murdered too. I didn't even know that. I didn't know his wife had offered any comment on it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it came in through friends of the family, and so
that's terrific that you got that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think when we look at Harrington and this mystery and this shutdown, one thing is certain for me, for those folks out there that are in their 50s and 60s, all right, you silverbacks, you are. And for those of us who are silverbacks, we can remember the excitement about Nemesis in the 70s, in college, high school. This was a big topic, ooh, we could be in a binary system. Books were written about it. There was a lot of excitement about it. Notable astronomers like Carl Sagan were, openly talking about the possibility of it. And then all of a sudden, boom, it just drops dead. The whole conversation starts dropping dead.
About what year was
that? It was actually after IRAS.
Okay, 1984.
With IRAS, yep. That was when you start looking, you go back, we have on Yowza.com, we have a page called the Jenner Files. And for people that are looking for some of this background evidence that you and I see as researchers, Jenner Files is a great resource for it. It's free. Go ahead and take a look at it. But you're going to see a consistent pattern that, after IRAS, the conversation on Nemesis came to a screeching halt. On Planet X, the possibility of this, Harrington's death put a real chill. And this was just an area of astronomy that was all of a sudden not to be discussed. It was like, some sort of unwanted love child nobody wants to talk about, that kind of a thing. So we saw that, but we saw what happened with him. But then there are others. So let's move on. Let's talk about a couple of these other folks that seem to meet these mysterious Planet X ends, or as the show title goes, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Arrgh.
Okay, Marshall, just one comment. You brought something to mind when you mentioned the chill that had been cast over all of the scientists in that field, where they felt suppressed. This is from the 1983, January 30th, New York Times article. This was just before the National Security Agency stepped in and intimidated everybody. Quote, recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory, that's Harrington and Van Flandern, have confirmed, Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbation exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas C. Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by a, quote, single undiscovered planet, unquote. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, calculate that the 10th planet should be, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there you go, Tom Van Flandern. He was the associate of Dr. Robert S. Harrington. After the security agency stifled everyone, Tom Van Flandern would not speak anymore about Planet X at all.
Oh,
as far as I know, he made no statements whatsoever, even when questioned about it. So there you go. He was intimidated. And also, let's see now.
You know, discretion is the better part of breathing air.
Right, right.
You know, so I mean, he got the word on that. It was a complete stifle. But there's been others, and you know, and I think you mentioned like Malachi Martin.
Oh yeah, Malachi Martin. Malachi
Martin.
You know,
everybody's heard that famous soundbite from Coast. Although, you know, the funny thing is, that soundbite used to be all over the place on YouTube. I couldn't find it.
Oh, really? I still have it. I still have it on my hard drive.
Oh,
but it's on the internet, though, I believe. You can get the audio because it's there was no video accompanying it. Although you're right. In fact, I did find it on YouTube just recently. So I'll try to send it to you. But anyway, Malachi Martin was a brilliant scholar, a Vatican-type scholar. He had 3 doctoral degrees, and he had been an advisor to several popes, one of whom I believe was Pope John the 23rd. Malachi Martin was 78, but he was rather in good shape. He was thin, and he was mobile. He had no apparent health problems at all. And then in the middle of, I guess it was the middle of, or the early part of 1999, he went on Coast to Coast AM, the night talk show with the famous Art Bell, where they talk about paranormal, metaphysical subjects, you know, like ghosts and extraterrestrials and all that. It's a very popular broadcast with a large listenership. And he went on the Art Bell show, and Art Bell said, this was shortly after Art Bell had been criticized and blamed for the death of the Heaven's Gate, 39 Heaven's Gate cultists, computer programmers.
He got
to get into that too.
On that.
Yes, they blamed him.
But I mean, he really that wasn't right.
Well, they blamed him because they were trying to discredit all the people who were bringing out information about this comet Hale-Bopp, which was the precursor, very much smaller precursor, advanced guard, you might say, to Planet X. And they didn't want anybody to know about Hale-Bopp. And I guess we're getting off a little bit, but we can get back to what we were talking about with Coast to Coast AM and Malachi Martin. But you know, when Hale-Bopp came in 1997, the government was very much afraid because they thought it was. This was what I read from James McCanney. Now, I trust his background on it. He seemed to have a pretty intimate knowledge in his interview with Rick Martin a number of years back. But McCanney said that the government knew about Hale-Bopp coming in. They thought it might be wormwood. The Vatican even sent an email, a message to the NASA asking, is Hale-Bopp wormwood? So the Vatican was very much concerned, and they had built, I think, was it prior to or right after Hale-Bopp, I'm not sure when, they went in there and constructed this elaborate astronomical observatory on Mount Graham in Arizona. And in the interview, that's how much the Vatican was involved in this whole thing. In the interview with
by the way, before you go on, Mount Graham is ideally situated for the longest duration of observation for Planet X as it flies through the system. And so they have, and it's a pristine viewing site. There's not that many around the globe, and that is a pristine site. So, I mean, they're sitting there situated to where they can watch it. And in terms of wormwood, what I've always been saying for folks is the reason I believe that since this object is coming up from the southern skies, the official report, the official sighting, which will be not too long before we can see it with the naked eye, it's what I call the 7 by 35 threshold. You know, once we can just get a household pair of binoculars and we can see it, that's when they're going to have to come level with us. But I think that the observatory that's going to be credited with the formal observation will be Project Wormwood in Learmonth, Australia. It's up in the northwest tip. And this is a site that does infrared investigation for near-Earth objects that are in Earth-crossing orbits. That's what they're really, it's part of a space card operation, so they would be the logical ones to do it. And so, you know, of course, whenever elites can do something that lends to self-fulfilling prophecy, they always go in that direction. So that's the reason why it will be called wormwood, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in this interview in 1999, this was 2 years after Hale-Bopp had come and gone, and fortunately it did not hit Earth. It did not cause devastation on Earth with a close flyby, because of the tail drag of Hale-Bopp slowed it down so that Earth was able to go around that big circle on the second floor of the department store and get far away. It was in a different, Earth was in a different season of the year where it was not going to be severely influenced. But I did see Hale-Bopp in the sky. I took the dog out one night around 9 o'clock in the backyard, and I looked up and I saw this thing. It's if you were to hold an orange in your outstretched arm, that's about how big it looked to me. Maybe maybe a lemon.
I saw it. Yeah, it was really a small orange or a lemon.
Right.
And, you know, it was really something else. What really amazed me was that on its way out of the system, it passed close enough to Jupiter that its orbit was reduced by 40%. And, you know, that to me is, when you're talking about these gravitational attractions of different bodies in space, wow, you know, this thing passed Jupiter at about 1 Venusian distance. That's the distance between Venus and the Sun. And it reduced its orbital duration from, you know, by 40% approximately, which means it's going to come back a whole lot sooner. But that's also part of something called cosine mechanism, which explains how an object that is in a polar orbit is going to be very unstable, and eventually it's going to do one of two things. It's going to crash, death spiral into whatever it's orbiting, or it's going to get flung out into deep space and become a rogue object. And so Hale-Bopp, you know, is arguably it's already in the death spiral. That's interesting too in terms of Avebury 2008 formations and crossing the cusp. I spent 5 chapters on that, and the thing that's really startling about that formation is it shows all of the planets exactly where they should be in 2012, except for Pluto, which is advanced in its orbit. So in other words, it's being perturbed in its orbit, which means that Pluto is eventually going to either death spiral in or just fly on out. But according to that formation, you know, that's what's, you know, we're going to realize in 2012. But going back to Father Martin Malachi.
Yeah, in that interview of 1999, Art Bell on the radio show asked the priest, Malachi Martin, why did the Vatican muscle their way, and I want to emphasize that term, muscle. They muscled their way onto Mount Graham in Arizona, and constructed this observatory. And Malachi Martin used very slow, well-chosen words, and it seemed like he was somewhat afraid to give an answer. But he gradually coaxed himself to give the answer by saying, and this is paraphrasing, well, the reason they have this observatory is because the highest echelons of the Catholic Church, of the Vatican, know that something is approaching within the next 5 or 10 years. And that was the entirety of his answer. And
now, when was that answer?
Well, that was 1999, so it could have been as late as 2009. He was off, of course. No, I don't think any man has been exact in their timing. Every time a man tries to set a date, he's wrong. I've learned not to try to set dates. Yeah. But the point is, he was saying they knew something's coming in, and it's in the near future.
Well, yeah. And now I do have a question in from the virtual studio. Is the Vatican astronomer article about ET at the observatory possibly related to this? Have you seen that article? No,
this is the first I've heard of that. Oh, well, wait a minute. Wasn't there an old one where the Vatican, an old article where the Vatican said, "Let us welcome the extraterrestrials"? Something like that, where we should embrace them, and this might go along with all the messages that are being given to us in fictitious form, in drama form, on television and in movies, in a television series, The Event, for example, which tells us that these extraterrestrials are wonderful people. They love us. They want to embrace us, but don't mess with them. Don't resist them, because they can destroy you with the touch of a finger. And that's the message we're getting from this series, The Event. Is that what the kind of idea that we're getting from this question, or is there something different?
It was a shot-in-the-dark question, and so didn't have a title of it. And I think I just was asking, but it really does bring a point in terms of how we're being prepared through media. And, you know, the message is really kind of all over the map. Part of it, I think, is Hollywood is doing what Hollywood does best, and they just have their thumb on the pulse of the country. You know, what's hot, what do people want to talk about? And they're just out satisfying demand. So I don't, you know, I mean, snakes live under rocks, but they don't live under every rock. And so in some cases, yeah, you could have someone that's going to be talking, and I've seen that, you know, when Emmerich brought out 2012, the movie, and what we saw was he was going to bring it out in the summer, which is when you bring out an action blockbuster like that, and he winds up bringing it out in a time of the year where, you know, it's the holidays and people are going for art films. You know, November 13th, I think it was, of that year. And the reason why was that they removed all of the mention of Planet X out of the movie. And that's easy to see when you watch the beginning of the movie. You can see the timeline gets real choppy, jumpy, and they actually show, you know, it's part of the movie visual where they're out in space and they're showing what looks like an object. But then there's no mention of it. And what I can surmise is that NASA had probably seen perhaps an early screening of that film, because Morrison et al. Were, you know, ramping up the old 2012 patronizing routine and humiliating anybody that would dare take it seriously. And they came out on a huge tirade about Planet X, and it never showed up in the movie because Sony clipped it out. And they dropped in that, you know, the neutrino thing.
Wow,
so,
you told me that.
Yeah, I mean,
I did not know that.
I see that. I see these things happening. It's a mixed bag of messages, and I think that what I see more than anything else is that they're less worried about the extraterrestrials and they're more worried about how they maintain their control.
Oh, for sure. That's what's always been paramount in their sick minds, is maintaining complete dominance economically and in terms of power over the masses.
So, I mean, it's not something where they're, you know, we just have a lot of competing agendas. But I think for folks in the mainstream, you shouldn't be overwhelmed by it, because if you just come to trust your own instincts, you're just not going to be stampeded like a lemming by someone, but you're actually going to sit and look at it and think things through. Like I always say, the only truth that matters is the truth that resonates within you, because you and you alone put it there. And I think folks that do that are going to do fine. But in terms of meeting other races, the indigo children are going to be the ones we'll turn to for liaisons, because they're going to instinctively sense whether that species that's contacting us is benevolent or, you know, or not.
Right. And the indigo children, these are people that have discernment, who seem to have greater discernment and understand some of the deeper implications of what's going on in life and in the world than the rest, who just look at the surface and watch the ball games and just sort of let themselves be carried through life. Is that what you mean? Those people who are discerning and insightful.
They're discerning. They're perceptive. You don't see multimillionaire indigos. Okay.
Right. Because they don't want to be. They don't want to be.
They don't want to be. They'd much rather just sit there and spend all afternoon watching a spider weave a web. Mm-hmm. Their thing is that, you know, what really drives them is they want to feel a sense of connection, of oneness with everything around them, and to understand it and to flow with it. So their sense of connection, the connection to everything that's outside of them. Material thinkers, consumers are very much turned inwards. And so everybody has this ability. It's just that for the indigos, it comes naturally, and they're coming into their own because the huge statistical push, you know, with as many people on the planet, you're going to have more of them, even though they're an infinitesimally small minority. I mean, if you look at Mensa, National Association of People, International Association of Geniuses, that represents 2% of the population, IQ-wise. Within Mensa, okay, indigos are a small fraction. And a very small fraction at that. So this is not a huge group, but these kids are really precious. A lot of them are getting drugged, and you know, just to make them manageable, because people just don't want to take the time to figure out how to deal with somebody that wants to take the world around them on their own terms, which is what they want to do. But when, you know, a real simple rule of thumb is if we are, you know, we're looking at, there's a contact event, and we know that there's indigo children there. If the indigo children, you know, if they don't want to be around the ETs, we don't. If the ETs are avoiding them, we want to avoid them as well. So it's when there's a connection. Those kids are going to sense it, and they're going to do it much better. I mean, I wouldn't want to trust politicians.
Oh, no. Well, you know, the indigo children seem to be those people who are somehow children of God, very close to God. You know, and I think we can all understand, regardless of what, you know, divisive religion we happen to follow. I don't follow any religions because I think they're all divisive. But those of us who just commune with God, we see that people who have this discernment seem to be given the discernment by that great power, that Creator, who gave us a mind and a heart, a mind to think and a heart to love.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered two so far. Do we have anyone else on the list?
with Malachi Martin now, what happened after he made that statement that he believed that the reason that the Vatican muscled their way onto Mount Graham was to try to observe this object that was coming in over the next 5 or 10 years. Well, within about 3 or 4 months, Malachi Martin had suffered a stroke, from what I read, and then shortly after that, he was pushed down a flight of stairs. Now, this was his own testimony when he was sent to the hospital. He confided to a friend as he was dying. He said, "Someone pushed me. Someone pushed me down those stairs." And I got this from several sources. One by word of mouth from a scholar within the Catholic Church who told me this too. So I know that's exactly what Malachi Martin had testified to, a close relation just before he died. So he was murdered. And if you look at the time frame, shortly after he talked about what we know as Planet X.
Well, he broke the cardinal rule. Shut up, you face.
Cardinal Balducci was one. Speaking of cardinals, he was another one who, from the Vatican, who actually alluded to this object coming in, this Planet X. We should do more study on him. Now, he was not murdered, but he's another source of it. Balducci, Balducci.
Okay.
Within the Vatican.
Let's do this, because we're up at the top of the hour, and I want to give folks a couple of minutes to go out and get some tea and take a break and play a little music. And we're going to pick up on this, and then also let's get current on what we see coming in the months ahead. You know, a lot of folks get you to weigh in on what you think Comet Elenin is. We've had a lot of talk on that on the show. We'll get into that stuff. So hang with me here, and I'm going to bring in some music for everybody. And what we're going to do for tonight is I want to play a little tune called Moonlight Serenade from Glenn Miller, and it's a recording from back during World War II. And when I heard this, the most unique time when I heard Moonlight Serenade, I was in a Moscow subway station. And it was the last train out. The place was deserted. And these things, you can't imagine. They're all marble, and they're underground, way deep underground. And this is where they were hiding out during the bombing. During War II, the Nazis were within like 30 miles of Moscow. And the Luftwaffe was bombing Moscow, and that's where they were, and they were listening to these songs. And so for those of you listening to Moonlight Serenade, imagine you're down in the bunker, which at that point was Moscow subway station, surrounded by immense walls of marble. And when I heard this musician play it, he was in a connecting tunnel which turned like into a megaphone, and the sound was everywhere. The acoustics was absolutely perfect. And every time I hear this, I remember that moment. So, guys, we got 3 minutes and 24 seconds for Moonlight Serenade. Start up the kettle, do what you got to do, and come on back.
Meteors, asteroids on Earth. And when he saw this, I believe he was aware of because he was watching the skies, he was aware of the additional numbers of comets and asteroids that were coming into Earth's vicinity. And he was about to make a presentation, I think, a very big announcement. I believe it was around the mid-90s, I'm not sure. And just before he made that announcement, he died in an automobile crash in Australia.
In the outback, on a lonely road. I mean, it's like it's two converging dust trails. How can you not know someone's coming your direction? Right.
I mean, they've done this. This is a common way of assassinating people, sabotaging their vehicle. You know, this is something that comes to mind. Princess Grace Kelly, the famous actress from many years ago, back in the 50s, married Prince Rainier of Monaco, became Princess Grace. She died in a car crash, and I recall the news report saying that the brakes on her automobile failed. Now, isn't that ridiculous? Here you have a princess with the best Rolls Royce and the best Rolls Royce mechanics money can buy, and the brakes fail, and the car crashes and she dies. You know, if the brakes fail, usually you hit a tree or something and you get a few scratches and bumps, or you might be injured but not die. Well, anyway, that's what happened to Gene Shoemaker, and it also happened to others in the same way. So that's another common way of getting rid of people. Gene Shoemaker would have alerted the scientific community, and whenever a person of high credibility like Dr. Shoemaker convinces and alerts people of his class of scientists, then the power elite become very much concerned, and they want to get rid of that person.
He becomes a real, and for those of you who might not know who Gene Shoemaker was, the Shoemaker-Levy, and those were that was a big comet that smacked into Jupiter. We actually had a chance to observe largest impact event. I've seen it's like, I think, a total of 32 fragments or objects, and any one of which would have been an extinction level event on Earth, by the way. And so that's where he really made his fame, was with Shoemaker-Levy. And but his death, it's always plausible deniability. But none of these guys ever just die a natural death in bed, do they?
No, and not even like Thomas Van Flandern, the colleague of Dr. Harrington. He just died recently. And I look at the time of his death is not too far from the time of the death of Dr. Brian Marsden, the head of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. Both of those men were concerned, I believe, about extrasolar system objects coming in our vicinity. I think Brian Marsden might have been either ready to talk about it, or maybe they figured, well, let's just get rid of him just in case he does talk about it. They knew Van Flandern had been with Harrington, and it might be a matter of time before Van Flandern, his conscience overcame his fear, and he might start speaking out, even though Dr. Van Flandern never, as far as I know, gave any sign of speaking out. They figured, well, let's get rid of him just in case he does speak out. That's how they operate, just kill him. It's easier to kill him than take a chance. That's my conjecture, but I think it makes a lot of sense in light of past history. So, wow, you see so many people passing away.
Well, Brian Marsden was a straight shooter. I mean, I knew him personally because we had been on a TV show together, PAX TV, and it was actually a very, very good show on asteroid threats. And after the show, we kind of struck up a dialogue, and he was actually very helpful in getting me started down this. We were looking at a Deccan Traps eruption to explain the KT extinction event as an alternate theory. And we had a lot of fun with that. And one of the things that he said to me, and it always stuck in my mind, when people are, if Planet X was there, we'd see it. Whereas, we don't see it, so it's not there. And what he said is the failure to observe an object proves only one thing. You have failed to observe the object. That's all it proves. And, but that doesn't stop the so-called experts from, just adding creative license to it. But, yeah, I mean, Marsden, he was a straight shooter. And I remember he was really, when NASA implemented a policy, a suppression policy on near-Earth object reporting, and this was back in 99, 2000, and at that time, if you can, for those that can remember back to the last century, oh God, how does that sound? But if you can remember back to the last century, we used to see newspaper articles and even internet and all kinds of stuff at that time, would proclaim new asteroid or comet discovered, has 1 in 32 chance of striking the Earth. Great headlines. Sold papers. The English tabloids just beat it like a rented mule. And what NASA did was they said, okay, they went out to all the astronomers and said, you don't talk about this publicly until we give you permission, period. We control the release. And they put in a blanket suppression. And what really made Marsden angry about that was that when they find these objects that have a low chance of impacting the Earth, the more they observe them, the more they create an ephemeris, a more accurate ephemeris. Ephemeris, in other words, it's like a bus schedule. You know where the bus is going to be at any one time. Well, they do that same thing with objects. But you have to make a lot of observations of the objects before you can have a really accurate ephemeris. And the whole thing of having it so that this information would be shared rapidly, all right, in which the way it was in the last century, was to stimulate all those additional observations. But once NASA put the kibosh on it, you know, that was it. It muffled it. And so it's just not that accurate. Now, how does that affect us today? Every time you see a news report that says an asteroid passed within a few thousand miles of the Earth, or, you know, within striking distance 3 days ago, okay? Every time you hear that, just say, thank you, NASA, for keeping us in the dark. Just thought I'd add that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, their whole purpose and stated policy is not to tell the people if something is approaching. I mean, this was stated in an NBC article, an ABC article a number of years ago, that NASA actually came out, and somebody, either inadvertently or whatever, from the agency said that our policy is if anything is coming toward Earth, we are not going to tell the people about it. I could understand their rationale. I mean, in one sense, they would not want to cause panic, but if you don't tell the people, then the people cannot prepare to protect themselves. There are numerous things someone can do. If you don't get a direct hit, you could save your life if you take the appropriate precautions if you know something may be coming. And that's what they're contributing to mass death by their selfish deprivation of information.
Yeah, well, it's also part of, you know, they're skimming the middle class. Look what's happening in the United States. People, you know, just why is it America's middle class is being sucked bone dry? All right, and that's really what's happening. Where's that money going? It's going into the pockets of people who are building bunkers. I know. I talked to the engineers who do the power systems and other things, actually build the structures. And they're telling me they're going from can to can 24/7. They can't keep up with the business right now, and they're building underground bunkers, luxury condo bunkers, $1 million on up, fully equipped, jacuzzis, you know, Blu-ray home theaters, you name it. They're planning to sit it out in comfort. And so a lot of this, you know, this whole thing, gee, you know, give it to us and there's going to be chaos and we can't handle it. You know, I really don't buy that. No. I don't buy that. I mean, think back to 9/11. Did everybody race out into the street with guns and start shooting people of color? You know, we took hold of the situation. I think we had a good beat on it as a country.
Right. I mean, the reason they don't want to tell us is because the people will, it's so obvious. They know that they control, the power elite controlled by fear. There is a handful of people controlling many, many millions, and they must keep us in fear of their power. Well, our fear of their power and of their punishment toward us, their penalties, our fear will evaporate. We will no longer fear them when we see a greater fear coming in the skies. They know that. And that's why they won't tell us. They want to see us kept under their fear and not under the fear of what's coming in the heavens. Then people won't pay their taxes if they know that you're going to be hit. They're going to just default under taxes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, it's and there's other ways. You know, I see here in the Lori in the virtual room says, why do you actually believe the oil prices are so high? You know, well, it's not oil shortage. The oil's there. You know, they had that when Libya thing started up. Saudi Arabia cranked up more oil. They couldn't sell it, so they cranked it back. You know, it's speculation, but all of this is really, again, it's siphoning. And, you know, the thing of it is that as I look at 2012 coming up, and you look at the current economic situation and what's happening, it's like for the last decade, they set up this milking machine to milk the middle class, keep them dumb, keep them happy, eventually just dumb and unhappy, but keep milking them, all right? Transfer all of that wealth. And it's like, you ever stop to think, where in the heck is it all going? And in the meantime, the middle class is not going to have the real resources to deal with this. People aren't going to have savings accounts. You know, I think a majority of American households, it would take them a few weeks to scratch together $2,000 hard cash. So what's going to happen when all of a sudden the price of food quadruples or more in the store because there's an announcement? You know, so I think it's more a case that, you know, this whole thing, we are not, you know, we can't handle the truth. Excuse me, FCC, that's just happy bullshit. We can handle the truth. I see people handling the truth every day. I get up, this is what I do 7 days a week. And I see people every day, and they're handling the truth. And they're handling the truth despite the lies. So that is, you know, that's hackneyed. It just doesn't cut it as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, you know, let's look at, because the show's clipping along here pretty fast. And we've got about 25 minutes. Let's take what we know about dead men tell no tales. Let's look forward now for the next 6 to 12 months. All right? What do you see coming, John?
Well, I think in the near future, somebody had mentioned Comet Elenin, and I think we all believe, I think you agree that it is probably one of the outlying comets in the gravitational grip of Planet X. Would you agree?
I do.
Okay,
yeah,
and so this is a harbinger of what's to come.
It's like a beehive. You know, throw a beehive through the window, there's going to be a lot of bees around it, right?
Right.
You know, same thing
so
here.
This is a harbinger of the disasters that are about to come. I think if this Elenin may cause some substantial damage to Earth, even though it's only a comet, you know, a bee surrounding that huge beehive, Planet X, it can cause devastation to Earth when the alignment occurs. We know the planetary alignments. There's a guy named Chatelain, French scientist going back to the 1970s, 1980s, and he states, I have him on videotape where he states that every time throughout history when they saw these planetary alignments, there would be earthquakes. And this was when Jupiter and Saturn and Mars would all line up in a straight line with Earth, and they would compound their gravitational pull. It would be like a tug of war with all the guys pulling on a rope in the same direction, right along the line of the rope. It would create earthquakes on Earth, so they knew whenever there was an alignment, you can expect earthquakes. Well, Elenin is supposed to go into alignment, again, I think in a few months, with Earth and possibly Mars. Now, I haven't been following it. Marshall, you probably have a better knowledge of that coming alignment than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that given the alignment, it's not an exact alignment, but my gut instinct on Elenin, you know, because the orbit has changed on it, is that this is going to come close enough to the Earth that while they're telling us, oh yeah, when it's here in, you know, August, September, we'll be able to see it in the pre-dawn hours, barely visible to the naked eye. No, I don't think so. I think when Elenin passes through, it's going to come close enough to be pretty darn bright. And I think that with the celestial alignments, plus everything else going on, we've noticed over the years other comets when they pass through the ecliptic, for example, like Comet Linear. It hit the ecliptic and boom, that thing just like it hit a wall, shattered. So, these objects are going to be easily perturbed by these alignments, and I think with the flyby and the Hopi prophecy, Blue Star prophecy, that says the blue Kachina will unmask. And I think what that really is saying to me when I read that is Comet Elenin is going to come close enough and it's going to shatter, explode, and then it's going to be bright. It's going to be really bright.
Unmask, yeah. I mean, that's what that would imply. It's getting brighter all of a sudden.
We're going to see it, and at the same time when we see it, I agree with you. Right. They're going to be, part of the Blue Star Kachina prophecy is that it is going to cause some problems for the Earth. Now, there is another comet that was back in 2007 or 2009 that a lot of the prophecy watchers believe was the blue Kachina. It was very, very bright. Probably at the time was the brightest object that was in the heavens.
Oh, Comet Holmes.
Comet Holmes. But the thing about Comet Holmes was that it didn't, we didn't have earthquakes or anything else happening around that time. All right. But with Comet Elenin, I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see some dramatic earth changes, and we're going to have some quake events, some tsunamis. It's going to be a real wake-up call. It is going to be, hey, folks, get your head out of the tube and look up, because what's coming is Euclid. Because the blue Kachina prophecy follows on the heels of the blue Kachina comes the red Kachina, and that's the one that really, really kicks us in the tutu.
That prophecy is so valuable to us. To
give
us an early warning.
For so many years, I could never connect the dots with that. I remember reading about that back in 2002, 2003, I mean, at the time, my head wasn't really into looking at prophecy at that time. But I remember reading it and just saying, well, that's a mystery. And it's obviously describing a celestial event. So, like I do with all mysteries. If I don't
Bible prophecy, Hopi Indian prophecy, Mother Shipton prophecy. There's so much prophecy. And Marshall, I'm glad you brought this up. There's a prophecy of Joe Brandt. Joe Brandt in Hollywood, California.
Okay, before you get into that, I want you to dovetail this question into your answer. This just came in, and Susan threw me at this from the virtual studio. This is from Marianne 2, and can't make out the rest of that screen. What is supposed to happen when Elenin comes through? Will the night be light, daytime, continuous light? And throw that into your answer.
I don't know. I mean, when a comet comes close by, I can just tell you from a basic physics point of view, you're going to get, the body is close enough to cause gravitational attraction to the Earth's crust and the underlying mantle below the crust, such that earthquakes would increase, and there's no telling where the earthquakes would exist. Of course, I have to take that back, because if this thing is coming overhead, and I believe it is, right, Marshall, it's coming over the ecliptic, above the northern hemisphere of the planets, right? So if that's the case, we would more likely see quakes in the northern hemisphere, whereas before we used to see a lot of quakes in the southern hemisphere because Planet X and its gang of surrounding comets were below the ecliptic. So now we expect more earthquakes in the northern hemisphere. We would expect all kinds of meteorological and geological disasters, including increased volcanic eruptions, which we're experiencing right now. There's a volcano in Ethiopia exploding. There's a volcano in Chile exploding. There's a volcano, another one in Greenland. Is it Iceland or Greenland? I forget the name, Grimvolt,
Iceland.
Grimvolt, and something like that.
Yeah,
three at least.
Mhm.
Major floods right now, right this moment in China. Huge flooding in China. Wildfires in Arizona. Incidentally, speaking of the wildfires,
We
it's
just
such
had
a
a levee
tragedy.
breaking. Yeah, and a levee just bust on the Missouri.
Oh my goodness! Yeah,
the
Mississippi is really in flood stage, and exacerbating. We see exacerbating signs of a coming earthquake in the New Madrid fault zone area. That's the lower Midwest surrounding the Mississippi River. You know, flooding, huge flooding, often is a precursor to major earthquakes. I don't know if you've noticed that. That's why I always get worried when I see this major flooding in the Midwest and in California.
Yeah, you know, I'm sitting there and I see this one gal in the virtual studio, Mama B, Africa cracked. For the folks that there is a section of Africa, the plates are separating.
That's a great, I'm glad you brought that up.
It's already happened.
Yes, that's a great point. I mean, Africa, there's a rift called the Afar Rift. And Brent Miller of the Horizon Project talks about that. He says, I was out there. They were doing filming, and they saw the Earth split open in a matter of 20 minutes. They had to jump in their helicopters to escape it. They were filming it. I'd like to see that on film. But it's called the Afar Rift, A-F-A-R. You can Google that and read all about it. And you're right. I've been reading about Africa splitting at various points, and we see, the Earth is not only splitting. I mean, I've got photographs, and we've all seen these photographs of big gashes in the road opening up, and people are looking across a broken highway, a split highway, at one another, like almost, across an expanse, and they're looking down into this chasm in the split earth, and they can't see the bottom of it. And then you have other cases where there's huge sinkholes. There's one in Guatemala taken from an aerial photograph. It's of the size of an entire street, four-way intersection. And it's just a deep hole, and you can't see the bottom of it. Now, we're seeing these sinkholes all over the place. There was a Sonic drive-in, fast food place that was completely swallowed up. I think in Cleveland, Georgia, someplace like that. And all over, things are being swallowed up. I mean, New Jersey, California, the Earth is... You see, we've got these mantle plumes that are coming up because the Earth's mostly molten iron core is getting hot due to the electromagnetic fields that are being generated by these incoming bodies. They're charge in motion, and charge in motion through basic physics principles generates electromagnetic fields. Sort of like our planet is sort of like in a microwave oven, and somebody turned on the microwave, and we're being bombarded with all these, this electromagnetic radiation. Well, it heats up the mostly molten iron core of the Earth, and then the core of the Earth is acting like the gas on your gas range, and the Earth is like a pot of pudding, chocolate pudding, on top of that gas, and the burner's turned on full blast, and the pudding's beginning to boil, and all this the smoke and steam columns are puffing up on the surface of the pudding. That's what's happening to the Earth. In fact, this guy that I know of who works in
funny.
oceanography...
Casey described that same thing. Do you know Casey described it? He said, I remember reading somewhere, it said, they asked him what's going to cause the pull shift, and he said magma bubbling up from the core of the planet.
Oh.
And, at the time he said that, Earth scientists had no idea. I mean, they really didn't even understand the core of the planet that well until we finally had satellites and that they were able to do some pretty deep penetration sounding and, find out there's a lot of stuff going on down there that we didn't understand before. So Casey was really, his explanation of it, these big bubbles that form up in the magma. And these chambers that are felt, and then from them streak out, the volcanoes. And he was describing something that Earth scientists couldn't have known at the time he described it.
Oh, you reminded me. Okay, this is what I got. Some information that I got just recently. The iron you talked about, the pole shift being related to the magma boiling up. Well, I was told that there has been the scientists know this, the ones working with the government know this, and they're about the only ones who know this, that the iron core of the Earth is shifting. There's iron coming up through the core, again, probably due to heating and mantle, these mantle plumes. You can read about them in geology books. Mantle plumes are normal, but now we're getting an intense, greater number of mantle plumes due to the heating of the core. And iron is coming up around the Hawaiian Islands. We're getting an excess of iron coming from the core, erupting through these mantle plumes, and, well, maybe not even erupting, but it seems to be, the iron seems to be gravitating to the area beneath the mantle. I don't know how deep. It could be as far as the core, but I believe it's probably into the mantle. Let me give you a little bit of a quick background on depths that we're talking about. The crust of the Earth, the lithosphere, the hard crust, is about 400 miles deep. Below that, you've got about 1,600 to 1,800 miles depth of this pudding-like material called the mantle, which is nothing more than molten rock, so very thick and viscous because it's molten interspersed with various metals. Some of them are magnetic, like magnetite, nickel, and iron. So consider the mantle, which is very deep, like 1,800 miles, being like pudding, and the Earth's crust being like the skin on the pudding after the pudding is allowed to cool a little bit on the pot. And that's what your lithosphere is like. Well, we've got an excess of iron coming up in the area of the Hawaiian Islands, and this is causing a magnetic pole shift. It's really weird. I didn't get all the details on it, but this is why the Earth's magnetic field is getting out of line, is losing its integrity, and is becoming skewed and moving toward the Hawaiian Islands. Now, another thing is coincident with this favoring of iron toward the Hawaiian Islands is there's a mountain coming up, a volcanic mountain rising up and ready to emerge to become a new island in the Hawaiian Island chain. We're going to see a new island rising up, and just as Casey warned.
That's right. Here, we got a caller here. Let's see what he's got. Hello there, caller. You're on the line.
Hi, Marshall. Hi, John. I would like to take John back to about 5 minutes ago when he was talking about Ellen. Could you tell the audience your name, please? Oh, yeah, Bernie, and I'm in Michigan.
Okay, Bernie. Good. Go for it.
Okay. I'd like to quote from Colburn, and it's the Book of Creation, Chapter 3, and it's 3:6. And it's just the first sentence. The first sky monster was joined by another, which swallowed the tail of the one going before, but the two could not be seen at once. So
that sounds like
talking about Ilanen being a harbinger that could possibly be the messenger.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? The guy in the back, the big guy behind it, swallowed its tail.
Blue Kachina, red Kachina again. Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is, and I think the caller really brings a good element to this, is that it's not where we have these, you know, out of sync prophecies and predictions. What we find, I think, John, you could say the same thing, is that the more we study this, the more we find commonality rather than discrepancy.
We're all working on a crossword puzzle with 500 pieces of the puzzle strewn all over the floor of our living room, and we're all sitting here surrounding it, and one guy's over there fitting a couple pieces together, and another guy next to you is fitting another couple pieces together, and together we're putting the pieces of the puzzle together, prophecy pieces of the puzzle, the ancient historical pieces of the puzzle, the biblical pieces, the scientific, it's all coming together. So thank you for that contribution, Bernie.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
But the question is, who has the corner pieces? Okay, well, I'll let you get back to the course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good one. Good one. Who has the corner piece? That is the thing I see disappearing all the time. And if you want to stay on for a second, Bernie, maybe let's see. Somebody is asking from P90X, was the G2 event on the Sun on June 6th related to Planet X?
Oh,
hard to tell.
No. Tell me, Marshall, what was that event? Was it a coronal mass ejection or flare?
Yeah, I remember it was, there was an event, I think in general.
There was a C class.
Overall pattern. I mean, the Sun is, the Sun is the Sun. And you're talking about, in terms of overall changes in how the Sun behaves, it's very small. It's less than 1%, really. But for us, that's a huge difference. Earth sits in this Goldilocks zone, and it's quite a precarious perch. We're just far enough away from the Sun, not to be Venus, but we're not so far away that we're Mars, and we're in the Goldilocks zone. So it's hard to say. What I can tell you is that Ulysses probe, that for us was that was the close for us. We were always, up until the Ulysses probe data came in 3 or 4 years ago, and that is a probe that was doing polar overflights over the Sun to look at the northern and southern hemispheres, compare them, and it did a few passes, and what they found is that the southern hemisphere of the Sun is markedly more active than the northern hemisphere.
Well, there you go.
And it's going out in a direction that's not, it's not where the whole southern hemisphere, is just completely energized, but rather it's more excited out to a region. It's like pointing down and out at like at a 45-degree angle. So I think that, when we're looking at solar events, it's a combination of all of the above. Yeah, you can have normal solar activity, but also the Sun is responding to Planet X. And so you have to flavor it all in together and understand that the nuances are very, very subtle.
Right. What we can do is, if we could find out when these comets graze the Sun, or when these comets crash into the Sun, and see if there's an accompanying blast from the Sun, because every time a comet grazes the Sun or comes close enough to cause an electrical discharge, that Sun is going to sneeze out something in response to it. And then you could say, yes, it was caused by the comet grazing the Sun or crashing into the Sun. And then you could say, therefore, we're going to see tremendous solar activity because there's more comets coming, because this huge bee swarm is getting closer to us.
Yeah.
Getting closer to the Sun.
Is that anything, got any other questions there, Bernie?
Well, I just had one more comment. The last 3 days in a row, we've had S-class events on the Sun, and they have been located in the southwest quadrant. There was one today. As a matter of fact, there was I'm on my phone, so I can't look it up. There was I think it was a 2.3 class flare this afternoon at 5:36 Eastern Time, and that was also, once again, in the southwest quadrant.
Well, I'm baffled by that, because I seem to surmise from all the evidence that I've been able to piece together, and it's not easy because we're not getting any help from the government, but I seem to surmise that Planet X...
I'm sorry. We're getting help.
We're like a guy who can't fly a plane, and we're suddenly got a hold of the controls and trying to figure out which way to move the stick, to keep from crashing. But I suspect that Planet X is now coming into above the ecliptic now, and I think it's already penetrated the ecliptic. Judging by several fields of study that I've been following, they all seem to agree. So if Planet X and its B swarm is coming above the ecliptic, then we would expect to see more solar hyperactivity in the northern hemisphere of the sun. So I'm baffled by that.
Well, in my, the book I just did, Crossing the Cusp, and I decoded Avebury 2008, and that formation shows the trajectory. It shows the orbit of Planet X, and it was the one part of the formation that had the most disinformation spewed on it, and which part of helping me to key in on it. But what it is showing is that this is, it's going to arch up, and when it comes to its point of perihelion, it's going to be when it's going down, and that is at the point where the formation says we're going to see it like a second sun in the sky, and but it's going to be huge. It's going to be a very, very large object, and it's going to be very frightening. And I know Bernie mentioned Colburn Bible. In the Colburn, what we're told is that when we do see this, the ancient Egyptians say that when you see it, women become infertile, men become impotent. It's so fearful that we actually experience a halt to human reproduction. That's pretty serious.
Okay, gentlemen, I'll listen offline. Have a good night. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we have to start. We know it's coming in. The evidence is just mountainous. So we have to start preparing. I'm thinking about the solar scorching that's going to be occurring, but that's just one of many diverse catastrophes. Many people are plagued by the floods that are occurring. Two, we've got to try to prepare as best we can with gear that's going to help us weather the flooding. Inflatable rafts and various kind of wetsuits, impenetrable waterproof suits, things like that, that we know we're going to need. We should start getting that for ourselves and for our families. Even a raft. I mean, it's going to be indispensable for people who are subject to flooding. And those who think that they've never had flooding before, like me, I have to expect flooding for the first time in 1,000 years, and maybe get a raft, an inflatable raft. Now, there's other things we have to worry about. Now, what about the hail? The hailstorms are going to be like grapefruit size. I know because I've been documenting it from the Weather Channel. I've got 250 hours at least of nothing but 6-hour videotapes with nothing but severe weather reports from the Weather Channel and numerous reports of baseball-size hail, even reports of grapefruit-size hail. Now, that's enough to kill people, obviously, and smash their windshields. I even have videos taken from people in their cars where they're screaming and this hail is smashing through their windshield, videoed from inside the car. So I've got this idea that people can pick up on. Got to pass this on to a lot of people. There is material, there is stuff that you can buy at a gardening place. I guess I haven't looked it up yet, but it's like fencing, the kind of fencing that you would put around your tomato garden. And it's like thin rails that are all bound together in a sort of a row that you can keep the animals from getting into your garden. But it's very light fencing, and it's bound together with wires or something. Well, imagine taking a piece of that would go lengthwise across the top of your car. Now, you're driving. You don't have any. You have to be immediately protected against hailstorms because they could happen when you're on the highway doing 60 miles an hour. So you got to have that thing, that shield, right on top of your car at all times, no matter how silly it looks. And this thing is going to block the hail if you mount it up there properly. It'll cover the entire top of the car. Now, it's just I was thinking. It has to be light, though, light plastic that will deflect this major hail coming down. That's an idea. See, I mean, I thought about ways of doing it, and this seems like it's already made. It's already you want something that you don't have to manufacture. You want something that you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's Building Supply and just buy it. And fencing might be the way. Now, you got to mount it up on your roof. And maybe the ends of it has to be cut long enough so that it will extend across the top of your car from the front bumper to the rear bumper. cover the entire top of the car. It won't be able to cover the sides. And thus you will still have clear view as you're driving because this thing is over the top of the car. It's like carrying a mattress on your car. And just figure a way to mount it up there so it would be secure. That could save lives. Save if your car gets demolished, you're out of business. How are you going to get around when your car gets demolished by hail? An insurance company can't pay for it because they're flat busted from all of the claims that they have to pay off on.
Well, that's what we're going to see. You know, I had Eihan Derave on, and he was in Japan after the quake and actually got back into the areas. And he said, you know, you had people living in tent cities, and they're eating white bread. And he said, I can come in here. He had a 4-ton truck. And he was, you know, whenever he could, he was bringing supplies out to these communities. But as he got further north, he was told, well, you have to get permission from like 4 or 5 different bureaucrats in order to bring in, you know, some fresh fruit and some vegetables that he would go and literally buy, you know, wholesale in Japan, same place where all the grocery stores are buying all their stuff. And, you know, he had the money to do it, couldn't get the permission. So these people are living on potatoes in white bread. And, I mean, talk about your blood sugar going to heck in a handbasket. I mean, how can you be positive and looking out for it? So, you know, folks have to think about that, but most importantly, you just have to be independent, and you have to look in your own area and say, you know, like, for example, I live out here on the West Coast, and I relocated recently, just early this year, but I made a point of making sure that I was on the uplift side of the San Andrea. All right? That's real important. And, you know, there's been a lot of psychics in the area where I live say this is one of the narrow strips of land in Northern California that'll survive because it's going to get pushed up as opposed to sinking. You know, the Central Valley in California was an inland sea. Well, I think it's going to become an inland sea all over again. But, and in that case, you're right. You definitely, you know, you want to have something that'll float. And also, you're going to be floating in filth and sewage. All kinds of awful stuff's going to be in there. There are going to be snakes and everything. You see this when they have these problems down in Florida. And, you know, and they were having it in New Orleans, where, you know, the snakes are getting flooded out and they're swimming through the water, and that was a dangerous situation. So you have to look at what is your local situation, and you have to take those threats that you would normally face, whether it's tornadoes or it's flooding or it's earthquakes or it's a tsunami warning area. You have to look at those because those are the kind of things that are going to be accelerated. But then there's the one big one, solar radiation. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier, and I can, in the chat room, it really is something, you know, that people are really getting out there. Now, you know, when we're talking about Elenin and we're talking about Planet X, I have a question here Susan's thrown me from the virtual chat room, from Jerry IT. When will it become visible? Let's just say it is Elenin and it is Planet X. What do you think, John?
Oh, I really don't know. I can't hazard a guess. I can just say that I believe that Elenin is probably one of the comets in the entourage of Planet X, and we may be seeing it sometime this year before the year is over. But the thing to really worry about is that question is not so important, not as important as how do we get prepared, or we know how to get prepared, and the answer is let's get started right now. I myself haven't done much because I've been so busy trying to warn other people, but I've got to get that inflatable raft. I've got to figure out some way to prevent the solar scorching. I know they have these solar blankets, these highly reflective blankets that campers use, and if we were to perhaps make sort of a dome structure with something highly reflective, that dome would not only resist heavy winds if it were, you know, a small structure, not the size of a house.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say about 12 feet in diameter, a dome. And there are places you can buy them. I forget, somebody was mentioning the name of, I can't remember the name of the company.
Actually, it's monolithic domes. I did an interview on them on my other show, Cut to the Chase, and that's at cttcradio.com for those of you out there that want to listen in on that. And it's part of the ACP series, Advanced Community Planning series that I've been doing. And it's one of those things that, you know, I get it thrown at me all the time. It's like, I'm doing this for the money. If I were doing it for the money, I would not be doing the Advanced Community Planning series, because a show like tonight is going to pull out the audience like crazy, and it's an important topic. But of more importance to me as a researcher is getting people organized and ready so that they can survive what comes. And that's what the whole point of the ACP is. I talk about, you know, dry water harvesting and building a good survival structure, something affordable. And, you know, that is something, it's just really hard to get people fired up to take that seriously.
Well, Marshall, you gave me an idea. We should have a central location, thank God for the Internet, on the Internet where it could be nothing but survival information, because, you know, you and I can only talk in generalities, but we can't really get people going on it because we're not giving them enough information as to instructional details. But if they went to a website, they could see pictures, they could see places where they could telephone to order the equipment. You could order, say, a dome, a 12-foot wide dome that would come to your house in pieces. You put it together, then you would overlay this highly reflective foil that would reflect the sun's energy. At the same time, you would have, I'm sure they have, well, I would hope some inventor would have created an electric generator that takes solar energy and converts it to electricity for cooling. So you could take that heat from the sun and turn it into an air conditioner inside your dome, and then under the dome you dig a hole and implant one of these prefabricated or put together yourself underground storm shelter. So now you've got a solar reflector protecting you from the heat, and then you can dig deep and further escape the heat of the sun. At the same time, protect yourself from the killer tornadoes that are coming. So it would be a dual-purpose shelter. We could put that on the website and really give the people the details.
Yeah, I mean, I have that, and what's really important for people is that you have to have protection from solar radiation. And actually, that's what we, in Planet X forecast, we said, and I still maintain that the single largest cause of death is going to be solar radiation. That's going to be the big killer. That stuff gets here at the speed of light, about 8 minutes. There's no warning. And for those on the sun side of the planet, when it hits, all you're going to know that it's hit is that you're going to just, like the Earth stood still. Everything's just going to stop working. That's electrical. That's got any kind of a digital circuit to it, because it's going to get hosed. It'll get cooked in its own juices. And at that point, you're in a period of storming that's going to last about 30 minutes. If you're standing out in the open, you're a poodle in the microwave. And so you got to find a place to duck out. I mean, that's really, really important. But sorry to say it, I've run out of time, John. So I've got to kick in the music. Thanks for being on. I hate to cut it short.
Thank you, Marshall. Good, and other people, and began to study and see that, yes, this does make sense. According to the physics that I know, it makes sense in terms of the simple phenomena that we experience every day. For example, electrical discharges. When you walk across a carpet, and everybody's experienced this, where there's static electricity is picked up by your body, and when you go to grab something that is a large metal object that is acts as a reservoir or a basin for electric charge. The instant before your finger touches that makes contact, there is a very painful snap, an electric arc, a discharge of electrons, static electrons from your body to that doorknob. Likewise, we see on a cosmic, celestial scale the same phenomenon occurring when comets drenched in plasma, full of a static charge, come very close to Earth, they discharge, and we see historical evidence, we see evidence in the Bible talking about these plasmatic or plasma discharges. Many people believe that the Grand Canyon was formed by electrical discharges causing arc welding, sort of, or a routering effect into the surface, deep into the surface of the Earth. And as this comet came by in a zigzag motion, it created a channel, a very, very deep channel that is now the Grand Canyon. That's just an example.
Yeah, well, I've
of
been
it.
there. I mean, you know, I know how you feel. I remember one time, I mean, this is when I was in the Army, and we went up into the Grand Canyon to go photograph some wreckage to have that needed to be removed, aircraft wreckage. And we literally were flying in a bunch of Hueys right down off the deck. You can't do that anymore, but like we were just 5 feet off the Colorado blasting through. You could almost hear Flight of the Valkyries, you know, dum, 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 dum. It was pretty impressive. And as I was going through, you know, and I was a young fellow, but I remember looking at the walls of the canyon and going, don't tell me a stream did this, or a river. You know, I'm sorry. This is hard rock here. You know, it's not going through sandstone.
It was obvious.
But you know, but we see these things also. Mars, largest canyon in the solar system is on Mars, Valles Marineris, and so
now,
are they going to tell us that was water too? Huh?
Right, isn't this the way routering, you take a routering tool and you carve a channel into a piece of wood, and that's similar to what happens with these discharges in the Earth. So we have electrical phenomenon occurring, and not only that, as you know, the electrical phenomenon, the discharging that occurs between close flying comets that buzz and graze the sun, causing discharges and sort of a reactionary solar sneeze, so to speak, that's called a coronal mass ejection, whereby charged particles are sneezed out in all directions by the sun, impacting all the planets and devastating those planets in many different ways. So there's so many electrical effects that we are basically our enemies, enemy weapons coming against us right now in terms of electrical and electromagnetic forces.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I both see these things. We're both in it for the species. And you can't, you know, I came to this and I didn't come to it with any sense.
Wreck the entire surface of the planet.
Right.
I mean, they knew from the beginning that what they were doing was, you know, just a long shot, to say the least, building these underground cities. I mean, Schneider was talking about all of that. He was talking about. Oh, I've heard. Yes, I read about him in your book, and I've seen some of his videos on YouTube. But I'm really sort of pleasantly surprised to hear that Phil Schneider was expressing the same or interpreting the power elites' fear and apprehension about this whole thing, despite the so-called, you know, complexity of their cities. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine they would be, because this is a superhuman event, you know, and man going up against a superhuman event is like, it's just there's no match at all. So anyone would be quite apprehensive about it, I'm sure. I would be. In fact, I would never go underground except for the solar scorching that's going to come. That's the only thing that would drive them underground, is a solar scorching. Because how else can you escape it?
Yeah. I mean, well, you know, when we were doing the channeling research, we had guides that were telling us, and different guides, and they all said this 2 miles underground plan was not going to work out for them, that they weren't going to fare that much better than anybody that's on the surface.
yeah. I mean, but I'd rather be on the surface in an earthquake than underground. But I believe, this is my surmisal anyway, that's my best guess based upon what I see coming. And we know the solar scorching is coming. If you see the movie Knowing, you see a graphic portrayal of that solar scorching that will basically kill most of the life on Earth, on the surface. And that would be the only reason that I could think of why they would want to go underground. Certainly not to protect against earthquakes, certainly not to protect against floods. I mean, they would have to come back out of the ground when the flooding comes, come back out of the ground when the earthquake happens. And they don't know because those events may be happening simultaneously. So I think they're scared. They're like a fighter, you know, going up against a world champion, you know, and they know they don't have a chance of winning that bout.
Yeah, I mean, it's not working out for them. But, you know, it really goes to the heart of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is dead men tell no tales. And I think that a lot of these incidents where people who were really getting to the heart of the matter met very sudden and tragic ends. And this was happening years ago, you know, back even before, you know, in some cases before I was even getting involved with it. And in particular, you know, is that article, that fabulous article that you wrote for Yowza. And I can remember at the time we published it, I thought it was just an interesting article. It needed to go out. But what I realized was that after we published Planet X and the Mysterious Death of Dr. Robert Harrington, and by the way, for my listeners, in the show description is a link to that article on Yowza.com, and you can go and get there and see what was written. This was back in May 2 of Connection to the Other Side, or to a Greater God. But as you are in it, you know, about halfway, if you don't have that, it really piles up on you and makes you start to feel pretty hopeless. And on the other hand, if you can connect, and that doesn't mean you throw the science out. You got to find a balance between the two. It's almost alchemical, if you will. But when you do that, I find that it gives you a sense of balance and hope for the future. What about you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's no human safeguard or platform or foundation that I can rest upon. No human being can look to anything that can look even to the highest achievements of man to protect themselves from these disasters. I mean, even the most technically guarded and founded, with the deepest foundations of technology and science cannot protect these men of power from what's coming. I mean, they're building underground cities, and still they're concerned. They're very worried about the integrity of these cities. In fact, here's something that I got from somebody, and somebody who's sort of on the inside, who's worked on the geological studies and the oceanographic studies that are going on right now.
Okay,
we don't
good.
hear anything
so,
about.
Some good current data. Yeah, let's do that. And then,
well, this guy was saying
we'll have to get into that, and I want this because I'm doing research.
Okay, well, this guy was saying that they're very much concerned about the integrity of their underground cities, even though they had, of course, the money to buy the very best geologists and determine what they consider to be the safest locations deep within the rock of the crust, Earth's crust. You know, the Earth's crust, the lithosphere, is about 400 miles deep. And I guess they went down several miles and found what they consider to be the safest regions, but still they're concerned. So what they did was, this person told me that they've actually been creating earthquakes with HAARP around near those regions where their underground cities are, just to test the integrity of those underground cities, because that's how afraid they are of going down there and being buried alive.
Whoa. That's some serious stuff. So they went down 2 miles, and now all of a sudden, the best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many miles. It could have been 4 or 5. I'm not sure exactly. But if you look at the earthquake, now we can corroborate this information by looking at the depth of some of these questionable earthquakes that people are insinuating are caused by HAARP. If you look at the depths of them, that might tell you that, yeah, maybe HAARP did generate these earthquakes at depths very close to those depths that are where the underground cities are built, just to test the integrity of the rock structure to see how well it'll hold up in a man-made earthquake.
Wow. 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 Well, what do you think they're going to do about it?
They're scared.
I mean, in the long run, they're trying. So, I mean, the best laid plans of mice and men are failing. Now they don't know what they're going to do.
Well, they're still going to go underground, but the best laid plans of mice and men are quite questionable and quite dubious when you've got a planet that's going to come in and wreck the entire, you've got a brown dwarf star that's going to come in and
again tonight. And I've got a fabulous guest on, an author who has contributed some terrific articles to Yowza.com, John DiNardo. And John, I'm bringing you in.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Marshall.
It's a pleasure as always. And I can see the chat room is getting all fired up. Susan, PX 2012. Hello, darling. You are my gal. We always have a good thing going. Susan comes in and helps me with the shows, and she's monitoring the chat room because I'm sitting here time slicing 3 things at the same time, and she gets all these really great things in for me. So, and she's telling me my voice is sounding mighty distorted. So, Susan, is the voice better now? All right, I'm in the studio. So while I'm getting my voice issues worked out here a little bit, first off, John, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell people how you came to the topic of Planet 12.
Well, I heard about Planet X in 2002, and immediately, without any knowledge at all about the subject, I had a spiritual understanding of it. I just knew that it was true. And I just feel this was something from God compelling me to get into the subject and to warn people about it and try to bring them to a closer connection to God as a result of these catastrophes that are coming to people in the world. As we know that fear often breeds a closer relationship with God. And that's what I felt compelled to do. Well, anyway, the more I learned about it, the more I realized that this subject really did harmonize with all the prophecies of the Bible. And not only that, I began to study the scientific evidence, and because of my background as a physics teacher and an electronics engineer and electrical engineer, I understood the electric solar system as people were beginning to present it, and how this electric solar system actually caused much of the devastating phenomena that we have witnessed throughout history and that we'll probably be witnessing again as this brown dwarf star makes its entry into our solar system.
So, now, when did this all start? You know, for me, I mean, I always get the question, you know, how did you come into this? Every time I do an interview with somebody else. And I always tell them the same thing. I walk straight backwards into it. What about you?
Well, you know, I just got that spiritual understanding, and immediately I felt compelled. And I know some people, I guess everybody has their concept of spirituality, and I can tell you that mine is general enough that everyone can empathize with it without speaking about any particular religious, you know, point of view. I just felt compelled by the Creator, God, to get into the subject and to start warning people that indeed it's true and the time is coming. And the more I learned about it, I started reading books by Mark Hazelwood.
2008. But this explained to me why all of a sudden there was this inexplicable stoppage, as though the whole topic of us being in a binary star system fell off of a cliff. All of the astronomers and scientists and science writers got a simple, subtle message with his death. This is a third rail topic. People with power will not tolerate you talking about it. And if they can take a run at you, you know, that's it. You're going to be running a spumoni cart in front of the Colosseum in Rome if you're lucky. But with his death, I mean, I think it's really necessary for people out there to understand the mindset of the people who did this, because, as you just mentioned in the opening of the show, things are not working out, okay? And the dots are not connecting the way they thought it would. And they went to extreme measures to, well, let's just call it what it is, to assassinate people that wanted to come out and tell the rest of us poor schmoes what the heck's going on. Robert Harrington was one of them. Brilliant man, brilliant man. Tragic, sudden death. His widow believes he was assassinated for his work on Planet X. So do I. So let's start with that, and then let's get into some of the other folks. But then later on in the second half of the show, after we have done Dead Men Tell No Tales, what I want to do, John, is then take that, move it forward into the present so people can see how all of these dots are connected from our point of view as Planet X researchers. Okay?
Okay. Dr. Robert S. Harrington was the chief astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. Dr. Harrington is mentioned in a landmark New York Times article of 1983, prior to the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite. I won't read the article because it's very lengthy, but it's a wonderful article, and Marshall has it posted on his website. In that article, it mentions, I'm just going to quote the part, Dr. Robert S. Harrington believes that this is a brown dwarf star. I think it says it somewhere in the article. And incidentally, here's a very telling phrase in that article that everyone should remember, because it absolutely proves that this body is coming in. That phrase is that it's 5 billion miles out. However, that may seem like a long distance, but it's hardly, it says, quote here in the New York Times article of 1983, hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. This was 1983. This is from NASA, by way of the New York Times. So we've established from that, the powers that be, that this body is within the gravitational influence of the sun. Take an analogous situation. An asteroid flies by Earth way at high altitudes, and it's just barely within the gravitational influence of the Earth. Is that asteroid going to be pulled in? Yes, even though the force is rather small, it will be pulled in gradually closer to the Earth